High in the glaciated peaks of the Andes Mountains, climate change is revealing a macabre archive of human tragedy. As rising temperatures accelerate glacial retreat, perfectly preserved human remains, some maintaining intact skin, hair, clothing, and even facial expressions, are emerging from their icy tombs after decades or centuries of preservation, creating a phenomenon scientists have termed glacial archaeology. The most dramatic example occurred in December 1998. When climbers on Argentina's Mount Tupungato discovered the mummified remains of a passenger from Stardust, a British South American Airways flight that vanished without trace in 1947. The body, preserved with flesh intact and still wearing a BSAA uniform, had been encased in ice for 51 years before glacial movement and melting exposed it at 4,600 meters elevation, 5 kilometers from the presumed crash site. Over subsequent years, additional remains and aircraft pieces continued emerging as the glacier retreated. This phenomenon extends beyond accident victims. In 1999, a 500-year-old Incan child's sacrifice was revealed by retreating ice on Peru's Mount Ampato. The Ice Maiden, as she became known, had been preserved so perfectly that researchers initially mistook her for a recently deceased individual. Her skin remained pliable, internal organs intact, and blood still present in her heart, allowing unprecedented studies of Incan sacrifice practices. The scientific value of these discoveries is extraordinary, as the low temperature, low oxygen environment of glacial ice inhibits bacterial decomposition while desiccating tissues through sublimation. Bodies emerge in states of preservation impossible to achieve through conventional archaeological recovery. In the remote mountain province of the northern Philippines, sheer limestone cliffs surrounding the town of Sagada reveal an extraordinary mortuary practice that has endured for over 2 millennia. Here, hundreds of wooden coffins hang precariously from cliff faces, at heights reaching 100 meters above the valley floor, suspended by ropes, wedged into natural crevices, or balanced on hand-carved wooden stakes driven into nearly inaccessible rock faces. This practice, maintained by the indigenous Igorot people, begins before death. When an elder feels their time approaching, they traditionally carve their own coffin from hollowed pine logs, often considerably smaller than their body size. This intentional undersizing requires the deceased to be placed in a fetal position, symbolizing that one leaves the world in the same position one entered it, completing the cycle of existence. The burial process itself represents an extraordinary feat of physical endurance and technical skill. After death, the body is smoked to begin preservation and delay decomposition. Male relatives then carry the coffin up treacherous mountain paths to predetermined cliff sites, often requiring precarious climbing along sheer rock faces, while managing the substantial weight of the coffin and its occupant. Some coffins hang completely exposed on the cliff face, while others rest in shallow caves. Many display carved lizard designs, creatures believed to represent eternal life due to their ability to regenerate lost tails. Wooden chairs, or sangadil, often accompany the coffins, providing resting places for the spirits of the deceased. The placement at such dangerous heights serves multiple purposes. It physically positions the dead closer to ancestral spirits dwelling in the mountain heights. It protects remains from animals and potential grave robbers. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates the community's commitment to honoring their dead by undertaking such dangerous burial procedures. Carbon dating of the oldest coffins indicates some have hung in place for over 2,000 years, though typhoons and natural deterioration cause older coffins to eventually fall. Today, this practice continues among traditional Igorot families. Deep within the Amazon rainforest spanning the Brazil-Venezuela border, the Yanomami people practice one of anthropology's most documented and biochemically complex funerary rituals: endocannibalism, the consumption of deceased community members in a ceremonial context that transforms grief into biological incorporation of the dead. When death occurs in a Yanomami community, the body undergoes a specific treatment process. After being wrapped in leaves and allowed to decompose for several weeks in the forest, the remains are cremated on a funeral pyre. The resulting ashes and bone fragments are meticulously collected and ground into a fine powder using a stone mortar and pestle designated exclusively for this purpose. This powder, known as titik mawe, is then mixed with plantain soup prepared by female relatives. The resulting bitter gray liquid is consumed first by immediate family members and later by the broader community in a ceremony called re'ahu. Participants consume the mixture in carefully prescribed quantities according to their relationship with the deceased. The entire process can span months until all remains are completely consumed. From a biomedical perspective, this practice poses significant health risks. Human remains can harbor pathogens that survive cremation, particularly prions, the misfolded proteins responsible for transmissible spongiform encephalopathies like Kuru, which devastated Papua New Guinea populations practicing similar customs. Yanomami practitioners have experienced documented cases of chronic respiratory issues from inhaling ash particles during preparation. Yet the Yanomami believe that failing to consume the deceased prevents their spirit from achieving peace in Hedukamisi, their afterlife realm. Each participant absorbs a portion of the deceased's essence, creating a biological continuity that transcends death. When anthropologists have suggested alternative practices, tribal elders explain that physical incorporation of their dead reinforces community bonds in ways that other funerary customs cannot replace, revealing how cultural practices can produce both spiritual meaning and physical risk within traditional knowledge systems that predate modern understanding of disease transmission. In 1984, anthropologist Owen Beatty led an expedition to Beechey Island in the Canadian Arctic to investigate the perfectly preserved remains of John Torrington, who died during Sir John Franklin's ill-fated 1845 expedition to find the Northwest Passage. What they discovered beneath the permafrost defied the normal processes of death and became a pivotal moment in forensic anthropology. Torrington's grave lay frozen in permafrost, requiring 3 days of careful excavation through rock-solid ground. When researchers finally reached the coffin at a depth of 1.3 meters, they found it filled with ice, perfectly preserving the body within. As the ice was gradually removed, researchers were stunned by what they uncovered. Not a skeleton or even partial remains, but a completely intact 138-year-old corpse with skin, facial features, and even eyelashes preserved as if death had occurred days rather than centuries earlier. Torrington's body had undergone natural cryogenic preservation from the extreme Arctic conditions. The 20-year-old sailor lay with his eyes partially open, his skin a pale grayish hue from the lead that had poisoned him. His facial features were so well preserved that researchers could clearly see his distinctively arched eyebrows and long eyelashes. Even more remarkably, when researchers carefully removed some of his clothing, they found his chest hair and skin perfectly preserved beneath. Scientific analysis revealed Torrington had died of pneumonia, exacerbated by severe lead poisoning from the expedition's canned food, which used lead solder. Tissue samples maintained cell structures intact enough to perform microscopic examination, with pneumococci bacteria still identifiable in lung tissue. His organs remained in such good condition that a modern autopsy could be performed as if on a recently deceased individual. The discovery revolutionized understanding of the Franklin expedition's fate while establishing new protocols for forensic examination of frozen remains. Torrington's body was meticulously reburied exactly as found, returning to its permafrost tomb after briefly revealing its secrets. On September 10, 1945, Colorado farmer Lloyd Olson prepared to butcher a 5-month-old Wyandotte rooster for dinner. His axe strike removed most of the bird's head but missed the jugular vein and left one ear and most of the brainstem intact, a 1 in a million error that created one of the most documented medical oddities of the 20th century, Mike the Headless Chicken. Rather than perishing instantly as expected, the decapitated rooster maintained balance, attempted to preen non-existent feathers, and continued making gurgling attempts at crowing. The brainstem, responsible for basic motor functions and reflexes, remained sufficiently intact to maintain essential autonomic functions. The cerebellum, which controls motor coordination, was partially preserved, allowing coordinated movement despite the catastrophic injury. Astonished, Olson began caring for Mike using an eyedropper to directly administer grain mixture and water into the exposed esophagus. A blood clot had sealed the major vessels, preventing fatal hemorrhage. The trachea remained open, allowing breathing, while most of the skull cavity filled with mucus that required periodic clearing via syringe. Mike's survival drew national attention, featuring in Time and Life magazines. Olson toured the Rooster in sideshows, charging 25 cents admission, equivalent to about $4 today, earning approximately $4,500 weekly. At the height of Mike's fame, the equivalent of $65,000 in modern currency. The University of Utah examined Mike, confirming the brainstem remained largely intact and sufficient to sustain basic biological functions. For 18 months, Mike toured the country as the Headless Wonder Chicken until tragedy struck in Phoenix, Arizona. While staying in a motel, Mike began choking on mucus during the night. The Olsons had left their syringe clearing tool at the previous venue, and by morning, Mike had finally succumbed, not from his decapitation, but from the inability to clear his airway. Scientific examination confirmed Mike's survival resulted from the precise angle of decapitation that spared crucial autonomic functions while removing cognitive structures. From October 26 to 31, 1948, the small industrial town of Donora, Pennsylvania, experienced an environmental catastrophe that would change American environmental policy forever. A deadly combination of weather conditions and industrial pollution created a toxic fog so dense that residents reported being unable to see their hands held in front of their faces, while an invisible chemical cocktail silently suffocated the population. Donora, home to 14,000 residents, was dominated by U.S. Steel's zinc works and American Steel and Wire plant. These facilities routinely release sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and metal dust into the air. That October, a temperature inversion where a layer of warm air trapped cooler air below settled over the valley, preventing industrial emissions from dispersing. For 5 days, the pollutants concentrated to lethal levels as factories continued operating at full capacity despite the developing crisis. The effects began subtly: mild coughing, headaches, and eye irritation. By the third day, hundreds were hospitalized with severe respiratory distress. Local doctor William Rongaus recorded seeing patients whose lips and extremities had turned blue from oxygen deprivation while conscious. The town's lone mortician became overwhelmed as bodies accumulated. By day 4, ambulances couldn't navigate the blinding fog to transport patients, while hospitals ran out of oxygen equipment. The death toll reached 20, with another 50 to 100 dying in subsequent weeks from complications. Approximately 7,000 residents, half the town's population, developed serious illness, with many suffering permanent lung damage. Forensic examination revealed lungs coated with fluoride compounds and zinc residue that had essentially chemically burned the respiratory tissues. The Donora smog, as it became known, represented the first documented air pollution disaster in American history. It catalyzed the first serious air quality legislation in Pennsylvania and later influenced the Clean Air Act of 1963. Nestled against the Austrian Alps, the ancient salt mining town of Hallstatt harbors one of Europe's most unusual sacred spaces, the Bone House at St. Michael's Chapel. Within this modest 12th century charnel house rests a collection of 1,200 human skulls, nearly half of them meticulously hand-painted with delicate botanical patterns, names, dates, and religious symbols in vibrant colors that transform human remains into works of folk art. This practice emerged from practical necessity. Hallstatt's geography, wedged between steep mountains and Lake Hallstatt, severely limited burial space in the tiny cemetery. Beginning around 1720, a solution emerged. Graves would be leased for only 10 to 15 years, after which the deceased would be exhumed to make room for new burials. The recovered skulls underwent a remarkable transformation process. First, they were carefully cleaned and bleached in the sun for weeks until achieving a uniform ivory color. Family members then commissioned local artisans, often the town blacksmith, who had experience with fine decorative work, to paint the skulls with symbolic motifs. Green laurel wreaths represented triumph over death. Roses symbolized love. Oak leaves suggested strength. And forget-me-nots memorialized lasting remembrance. Each skull bears the name of the deceased and their years of life, transforming anonymous remains into individualized memorials. The practice peaked between 1760 and 1900, with the most elaborate designs appearing during the mid-19th century, when nearly every exhumed Hallstatt resident received this treatment. Catholic priests blessed each painted skull before installation in the Beinhaus, where families would visit them on All Souls' Day to light candles and pray. The most recent addition to the collection occurred in 1983, indicating the tradition's remarkable persistence into the modern era. Today, the skulls are arranged by family groups, providing a unique hereditary record spanning nearly 3 centuries of this isolated alpine community. During the French Revolution's reign of terror, 1793 to 1794, over 16,500 people were executed by guillotine, with witnesses documenting a disturbing acoustic phenomenon that became known as Le Chant de la Lame, the Song of the Blade. This eerie sound, audible only in the moments before decapitation, was described consistently across multiple independent accounts as a high-pitched, almost musical humming that crescendoed as the blade descended. Charles-Henri Sanson, the official executioner of Paris who performed over 2,800 guillotine executions, left detailed journals describing the phenomenon. According to Sanson, the sound became audible only when the blade was approximately 3/4 of the way through its fall, intensifying in the final microseconds before impact. He noted that the noise was directional, seemingly audible primarily to the person positioned beneath the blade, with most spectators unable to perceive it. Scientific evaluation of preserved Revolutionary-era guillotines reveals a fascinating acoustic explanation. The triangular blade, weighing approximately 88 pounds and falling from a height of 14 feet, created a vacuum pocket directly beneath its cutting edge. As this vacuum collapsed in the final moments of descent, it generated ultrasonic compression waves within a frequency range that human hearing can detect only at extremely close proximity, precisely the position occupied by the condemned. Engineering analysis indicates the sound resulted from a combination of factors unique to the guillotine's design: the blade's specific weight-to-surface area ratio, the precise angle of its bevel, and the lubrication methods used on the guide tracks. Modern replicas fail to reproduce this sound, due to subtle differences in manufacturing materials and techniques. For those awaiting execution, this ghostly humming represented their final sensory experience, a macabre acoustical phenomenon that executioners came to interpret as death's whisper, and which added another layer of psychological terror to an already horrifying punishment. In the harshest environments of the Arctic Circle, traditional Inuit communities developed a remarkable and necessary practice for handling infant mortality during the long polar winters, when a baby died during the months when the ground remained frozen solid from October through June. Proper burial in the earth became physically impossible. Rather than immediately conducting funeral rites, Inuit families developed a preservation technique that maintained the dignity of their deceased while acknowledging environmental realities. The process began immediately upon death, with the infant's body carefully washed using melted snow by female elders. The body was then positioned in a natural posture, typically as if sleeping, and wrapped tightly in several layers of sealskin or caribou hide that had been scraped extraordinarily thin to remain pliable even in sub-zero temperatures. The wrapped bundle was then placed in a specially constructed wooden box, or, in some communities, a miniature sled-like structure. These containers were then positioned in protected snowbanks away from predators but accessible to the family. The intense, consistent cold of the Arctic winter, often maintaining temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius for months, effectively cryogenically preserved the remains, preventing decomposition while maintaining the physical integrity of the body. Mothers would regularly visit these sites, sometimes bringing offerings or performing quiet songs meant to guide the child's spirit. When spring arrived and the ground thawed sufficiently for digging, elaborate community ceremonies would be held. The preserved bodies, sometimes carried throughout the winter migration, would be unwrapped and prepared for final burial according to traditional practices. Archaeological evidence suggests this tradition dates back at least 1,000 years across various Inuit groups from Alaska to Greenland. Far from a callous response to death, this practice represents a sophisticated adaptation to extreme environmental conditions while maintaining cultural dignity and proper respect for the deceased. On the eastern coast of Barbados stands Christchurch Parish, home to one of the most thoroughly documented paranormal mysteries in colonial history. The Chase Vault, a massive structure of coral stone and cement weighing several tons, became infamous between 1812 and 1820 for a disturbance that defied rational explanation and was witnessed by dozens of prominent community members. The trouble began after the burial of the Chase family's daughter, Dorcas, in 1812. When the vault was reopened 8 months later for another family member, witnesses were shocked to find Dorcas's heavy lead coffin flung against the opposite wall. Assuming vandalism, officials restored order and sealed the tomb with mortar, impressing it with government seals to detect future tampering. 4 years later, when opened for another burial, all coffins except one were again discovered in complete disarray, some upended, others leaning against walls. The confusion was inexplicable. The seals remained intact, the single entrance undisturbed. Once again, the coffins were arranged properly, and the vault resealed under official supervision with fresh mortar, bearing the governor's seal, pressed into it while still wet. The pattern repeated in 1819 and 1820 with progressive intensity. During the 1820 opening, attended by Barbados Governor Lord Combermere himself, the coffins were discovered in such chaotic arrangement that one had shattered against the wall. The heavy lead caskets, requiring several men to lift, appeared to have been tossed about like toys, yet the sealed entrance remained undisturbed. After this incident, the governor ordered the coffins removed and reburied elsewhere. The vault has remained empty since. Contemporary investigations ruled out flooding, earthquakes, or human interference. Modern theories suggest trapped gases from decomposition, though this fails to explain why only this particular vault, one of many similar structures in the cemetery. Upon the death of Louis XIV, the Sun King, who ruled France for 72 years, court physicians performed an autopsy that included removing his heart in accordance with royal custom. This organ, symbol of royal power and divine right, underwent a specialized mummification process using brandy, myrrh, and aromatic herbs before being sealed in an ornate silver reliquary, embossed with the royal crest and religious iconography. The heart was installed with ceremony at the Church of Saint-Paul, Saint-Louis, in Paris, where it remained an object of veneration for loyal monarchists. However, during the chaos of the 1789 French Revolution, when revolutionaries systematically destroyed symbols of monarchy, the church was ransacked and the royal heart disappeared. For decades, historians believed the heart had been destroyed or perhaps consumed by revolutionaries in a ritual act of symbolic cannibalism reported in some revolutionary accounts. The truth proved even stranger. In 1895, over a century after its disappearance, a Paris antiques dealer acquired a mummified organ in a damaged container from a private estate sale, initially believing it to be a curiosity of Egyptian origin. Upon examination by medical experts, the heart's preservation method was identified as consistent with 18th century royal French practices. Documents accompanying the relic traced its journey through several revolutionary collectors, including one who had allegedly carried it as a macabre talisman during the Terror. Analysis in 2015 using carbon dating and comparative DNA from Louis XIV's known living relatives confirmed with 98% probability that the desiccated organ was indeed the king's heart. Today, this mummified royal organ resides in the Royal Basilica of Saint-Denis, outside Paris, finally rejoining other remains of French monarchs. The heart, shrunken, darkened, but remarkably intact, measures approximately 10 centimeters across and weighs just under 120 grams. For 57 days beginning on July 25, 2001, residents of Kerala, India, witnessed an atmospheric phenomenon that seemed straight from biblical prophecy. Crimson rain falling from the sky, staining clothes, buildings, and vegetation with what appeared to be blood. The red precipitation fell in sporadic downpours across the Kottayam and Idukki districts, sometimes concentrated enough to reduce visibility and create flowing rivulets of scarlet liquid through village streets. Panic spread rapidly as local media reported the phenomenon. Religious leaders proclaimed divine judgment, while rumors of extraterrestrial contamination gained traction after a sonic boom and flash of light were reported in the region just before the first red rainfall. Initial samples revealed the water contained suspended red particles approximately 4 to 10 micrometers across, giving it a viscosity and appearance disturbingly similar to diluted blood. The Center for Earth Science Studies in Thiruvananthapuram first analyzed the samples, determining the particles were biological in nature, but without identifying cellular structures consistent with known microorganisms. This ambiguity fueled controversial theories, including one from physicists Godfrey Lewis and Santosh Kumar of Mahatma Gandhi University, who proposed the particles might be extraterrestrial microbes introduced by a fragmenting comet, pointing to the lack of DNA in initial tests. Subsequent analysis by India's Tropical Botanical Garden and Research Institute identified the particles as spores from a local genus of green microalgae, Trentipolia, which can produce red pigmentation under certain conditions. Yet questions remained about how such a massive quantity of spores, estimated at over 50,000 kilograms, became airborne simultaneously. The phenomenon recurred on a smaller scale in 2006 and 2012, and Kerala residents remain divided between scientific and supernatural explanations. Meteorologists have since documented that the unusual confluence of monsoon conditions and algal blooming can create similar red rain events elsewhere. In southern Italy from the 15th through 18th centuries, a peculiar affliction known as tarantism seized rural communities each summer. Victims, predominantly peasant women, would suddenly collapse, claiming to have been bitten by the wolf spider locally called tarantula, though actually the European wolf spider, Lycosa tarantula, not the modern tarantula family. What followed was a bizarre medical drama that shaped cultural practices for centuries. The afflicted would fall into a death-like torpor, followed by hysterical convulsions, uncontrollable weeping, and sensations of excruciating pain radiating from the bite site. Contemporary physicians documented symptoms including abdominal distension, difficulty breathing, and a slowing pulse that suggested imminent death, unless the victim performed the tarantella dance. This frenzied ritual required specific musical accompaniment, with drummers and pipers playing increasingly rapid melodies. The victim would dance for hours or even days, sometimes continuing until complete physical collapse. The dance followed strict choreographic patterns, circular movements, rhythmic stomping, and mimicry of the spider itself. Medical historians now recognize tarantism as a culture-bound psychosomatic condition, likely triggered by the harsh socio-economic conditions of feudal southern Italy. The dance provided a sanctioned outlet for expression in a rigidly controlled society, particularly for women. The association with spider bites legitimized behavior otherwise forbidden, women dancing publicly, displaying emotional distress, and commanding community attention. Though no actual spider in the region produces venom capable of such effects, the belief in the tarantella's curative power was so entrenched that annual festivals emerged to prevent recurrences. Across the foggy valleys and windswept mountains of Wales, for centuries locals have reported witnessing mysterious floating orbs of light known as Canwyll Corph, Welsh for corpse candles. These spectral illuminations, typically pale blue or yellowish white, hover just above the ground and move with apparent intelligence, following ancient paths from homes to churchyards. Welsh death records from the 1600s through the early 1900s contain hundreds of documented sightings by clergymen, doctors, and community leaders, respected individuals whose testimonies were taken seriously. The lights reportedly appeared in precise patterns, manifesting first over the home of a soon-to-be-deceased individual, then traveling along the exact route their funeral procession would later take, finally disappearing at the precise spot where their grave would be dug. The medieval Welsh believed these lights represented the soul's essence, departing before physical death. Parish registries describe instances where multiple witnesses observed a corpse candle hovering outside a healthy person's window, only for that individual to unexpectedly die within days. In some accounts, the size and brightness of the light corresponded to the age of the person: dim, small lights for children, brighter, larger ones for adults. Particularly chilling are the multiple candle sightings, where several lights appeared simultaneously, preceding community disasters. Before a 1704 mine collapse in Glamorgan, 12 distinct corpse candles were reportedly seen floating toward the churchyard, matching exactly the number of miners who perished days later. While modern science suggests these phenomena might be attributed to bioluminescent fungi or methane ignition from decomposing organic matter in bogs, similar to will-o'-the-wisps, the precise correlation between sightings and subsequent deaths remains difficult to explain. In February 1959, 9 experienced Russian hikers led by Igor Dyatlov ventured into the northern Ural Mountains and never returned. The search party that eventually located them encountered a scene so bizarre it defies conventional explanation. Even after 65 years of investigation, their tent was found ripped open from the inside, with the hikers' footprints showing they had fled barefoot into sub-zero temperatures and howling winds. The bodies were discovered scattered across the slope in various states of undress, despite the minus 30 degrees Celsius conditions. Some wore only underwear. Others had oddly traded clothing with each other before death. The corpses displayed perplexing injuries. Lyudmila Dubnina was missing her tongue and eyes. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Alexander Kolovatov, and Semyon Zolotaryov had suffered catastrophic chest fractures requiring force equivalent to a car crash, yet their skin remained unbruised. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko showed inexplicable radiation levels on their clothing. Forensic examination determined some had lived for hours after sustaining their injuries. The Soviet government's classified investigation concluded the deaths resulted from a compelling natural force, sealing the records for decades. When finally declassified, the files were found suspiciously incomplete. Modern theories range from infrasound-induced panic caused by wind patterns, creating a phenomenon known as acoustic vertigo, to a military weapons test gone wrong, supported by reports of orange orbs in the sky that night from other witnesses. The Dyatlov Pass incident has spawned numerous investigations, including a 2019 Russian government reopening of the case that attributed the deaths to an avalanche. Yet this explanation fails to account for the radiation, the missing tongue, or why experienced mountaineers would cut open their shelter and flee rather than properly exit. In the ancient Assyrian city of Nimrud, archaeologists uncovered a remarkable limestone sarcophagus dating to approximately 800 BCE with properties that defied conventional understanding. This rare anthropophagus sarcophagus possessed a unique mineral composition that actively accelerated decomposition, effectively dissolving human flesh while leaving bones intact. Analysis revealed the limestone contained an unusually high concentration of calcium oxide, also known as quicklime, combined with natural acids that, when activated by the humidity and bacteria from decomposing bodies, created a chemical reaction similar to modern alkaline hydrolysis. This process, essentially liquefying soft tissues through saponification, reduced corpses to skeletons in a fraction of the normal decomposition time. What makes this sarcophagus particularly fascinating is evidence suggesting the Assyrians understood and deliberately exploited these properties. Inscriptions reference the sarcophagus as the vessel that returns flesh to earth, indicating its specialized funerary purpose. Modern scientific analysis has identified microscopic channels within the limestone that would have facilitated the drainage of liquefied remains, while the sarcophagus interior bears distinct staining patterns consistent with repeated biological dissolution. This ingenious design represented sophisticated biochemical knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 19th century, when similar chemistry formed the basis for modern embalming techniques. For ancient Assyrians, this technology held both practical and spiritual significance, expediting the soul's journey to the afterlife while efficiently managing the physical remains in a culture where bone preservation was considered essential for proper ancestral reverence. When Mount Vesuvius erupted with catastrophic force in 79 AD, it unleashed a pyroclastic surge reaching temperatures of 300 to 500 degrees Celsius, 570 to 930 degrees Fahrenheit. This intense heat instantly vaporized the soft tissues of Pompeii's residents, while the volcanic ash hardened around their bodies, creating perfect negative spaces, hollow cavities preserving their final moments. These human-shaped voids remained undiscovered until 1863, 1903, when archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli pioneered an ingenious technique. By pouring liquid plaster of Paris into these cavities and allowing it to harden, Fiorelli created haunting three-dimensional casts, capturing victims in extraordinarily lifelike poses. A mother cradling her child, a guard at his post, a dog still chained and contorted in its death throes. The plaster casts reveal intimate details, facial expressions of terror, clothing textures, even hairstyles preserved in this moment of catastrophe. Modern technology has further enhanced our understanding, with CT scans revealing skeletal remains inside these casts, sometimes showing fractured skulls from the intense heat that boiled their brain tissue. Some victims appear peaceful, suggesting rapid asphyxiation from toxic gases before the ash entombed them, while others show defensive postures indicating awareness of their impending doom. These casts serve as both archaeological treasures and poignant memorials. Unlike traditional archaeological artifacts, they capture not just physical objects, but the human experience of disaster. The posture of a man covering his face, a pregnant woman collapsed, couples embracing in their final moments. Today, approximately 100 of these casts are displayed throughout Pompeii and in museums worldwide.